So can I start or should we wait for some minutes?
I'll introduce you. We'll make a start now, but I'll spend a few moments talking and then hand over to you. Actually, could you just unshare your screen for a moment and then, because I want to just...
Yeah, sure.
Second,
Give me a second.
Sure. Okay, welcome everybody to our 107th Reading Online Sport Economics Seminar, the first of the autumn or the fall schedule for 2022. We are delighted to have Anastasia Nebolsina talking today, presenting on hosting sports mega events, the cost of ensuring rotation. Just before she takes over, and I will put this onto Twitter, and so you will have seen the first draft of the schedule with a couple of tweaks. Now have a complete schedule for the coming months up until Christmas. So you can see that on your screen now. So we have today's talk. You'll have me talking next week, and then Dave Berry, Gurgly Surila on October the 7th, and talks all the way through to December the 9th, and we have Brian Mills from the University of Texas. I'll put all of this on Twitter and share it so that you have an idea of the schedule. But we have an exciting set of online talks over the coming months. But without any more delay, Anastasia, please do take away your talk. Anastasia has asked that you park substantive questions to the end. So if you have any questions for clarification, short questions for clarification, please do raise your hand during the talk. But please, there'll be plenty of time at the end for discussion and more substantive questions. So Anastasia, all yours.
Okay, thank you for having me. And I will present our joint paper with Dmitry Dagaev about the hosting mega events. So, yeah, I hope you can hear and see me well, so I can proceed. Yep. Let's start with motivation. So, if sequence of hosts for World Cup, it's a football mega event, you would see that mostly it was either in Europe or in America sometime, and we do not see any hosts from Africa or Asia, and it raises a question about inequality. So why we do not see hosts in this part of the world? And actually, in the beginning of 21st century, there was this kind of scandal during the selecting of hosts for a new cup. And during this year, Germany won by one vote, and there are some scandals about bribes and so on. And after this year, the president of FIFA thought about the policy which could help to fix this problem and to ensure rotation between continents. And later on, in the next bidding stage, the South America was granted to host the cup. And after this, several years after, the rotation policy was abandoned. So, and naturally, we think why the rotation could be achieved naturally via competition between countries, not by the strict rules. And why we care about this question? So, why the rotation is important for us or for the governing bodies? So, first, we know from the literature that there are various benefits from hosting mega events. It could be economic benefits in terms of trade, tourism, or investments, and also there are many intangible benefits which comes with the hosting mega events. And if we look at the website of FIFA, we see that their values contain this idea to make the football a global game and also promote the equality and freedom. And that's why we would like to have hosts from many countries to promote all these things that I have mentioned. And the idea is how can we build the optimal mechanism to ensure rotation? So not to introduce it as a strict rule, but make it more competitive, but competitive and still try to achieve the rotation. Now I proceed with the literature about these topics, and I would say that there is no similar paper to us. So there is several papers about mega events. Some of them try to estimate the effect on economy, so whether it is beneficial or not to have the mega events from economic perspective as well as from intangible perspective. For example, the paper I mentioned first, talking about the feeling good factors, so how people um, perceive when the games or Olympic Games are in their country. Um, yes. And also there is paper in this part of the literature which discusses what factors make the bid for hosting a mega event successful. So for example, should be a good stadiums or should be a large country and so on. Another part of the literature focusing on the decision-making processes, and some of the papers try to describe how different voting processes are applied in different international organizations, and some of them try to make suggestions how to improve it to achieve particular goals. But I would say that in both of these parts of the literature, there is no theoretical papers which try to model the decision-making processes in sport international organizations, and that's why our paper tries to contribute in this way. So now I would proceed to describing the model. I would try to be very slow because sometimes it's very confusing to get used with the notations. So please ask questions if something isn't clear. So the model can be described in this way. So we would have a multi-period game, and there will be three players. First player is the committee. You can think about the body which selects the hosts, like FIFA. And then we would have two countries, A and B, and they would try to propose bids for the right to host the mega event. So, I'm sorry. Yeah. As I mentioned, we have three players. And if we think about the countries, they have endowment. It's like a GDP or other measure, and they are noted by WA and WB. Next, what can the committee do? It can determine the distribution policy. So we assume that each mega event can bring a profit. And this profit could be redistributed between the committee and the country which hosts the event. And the committee before the bidding stage can propose the share alpha t in period t, and the alpha t goes to the country, and the rest of the profit is going to the committee. Yeah, and after the committee proposes a redistribution policy, the countries compete for the right, and they compete like a first price auction. So they proposes a bid in period T from each country, and the higher bid wins. And this country will host the tournament in the next period. I would return to the timing later on. And also, there is an important assumption here that the committee and the country which should host the tournament would receive a large negative payoff if the event doesn't hold. The event can not hold if the country is a bankrupt. So if within a period there is a negative budget of a country. In this case, we assume that it is a bankrupt and the committee and the country receive a large negative payoff. So also, I would like to highlight important technical details which will partially determine the further results. The first is a tiebreaker rule. So if we have equal bids from two countries, we would select as a winner the country with the highest endowment. So for example, if country A, country B propose the same bid, but the country A is richer, we would say that the winner is the country A because, for example, they have a better environment or the better general quality of stadiums or, I don't know, infrastructure. And that's why we would like to assign the right to host an event to this country. Also, we introduce a minimal non-divisible unit by epsilon, and it would play a role in the end of the solution of the model. And also, we assume that if a country is indifferent between bidding or not, it bids. Like, we would like to receive these intangible assets anyway, therefore, we would bid for hosting the event. Is it clear now about the setting, key players, and their actions? Okay, I would assume there is no questions. And returning to the timing. So the game proceeds as follows. First, the committee select a share to redistribute for the next period. So timing of the share is determined by the period when the event would take place. So it's like t+1. Then, knowing the redistribution policy, the countries proposes bids, and they also propose bid to win the right to host the tournament in the next period. Then, if it is not the first period, the event take place, and the country receive its prize as well as the committee. And then we update the endowments, take into account whether the country pay the bid and get the profit, and then we proceed with the game further. In the last period, there is no bidding stage, so in the last period, we have only the mega events, and then we make the payments, and the game ends. So returning to the scheme, again, we have the committee, which proposes a distribution policy. Then we have the bidding stage. Also, we have a winner after the bidding, and the winner pays a bid at the same time, so in the first period. Then we proceed to the next period, so there is no event in the first period because, as I said, the event is in the next period from the bidding stage. So in the next period, we have again the decision of the committee, decision of the country, and here we have the mega event which takes place in the country which won in the previous period. So it's kind of difficult mechanics, but it would be clear why we use indeed this process later on. So now we start solving this game, and first we solve this game for 2 periods. So it means that we have one bidding stage, and in the second period we have only the mega events in the redistribution of the profits. So let us determine the feasibility set of bids for countries. So the first condition means that we shouldn't bid more than we have. So for example, if I'm a country B and I have an endowment W1B, 1 means in the first period, I shouldn't bid more because I will be bankrupt, and it is not rational for me. The second condition is a profitability constraint. It means that if I receive alpha 2V, then I shouldn't bid more than that because it will be a loss. So I should bid less to receive a positive or zero profit. And we formulate this feasible set of bids for countries. Next, let us solve the model. So we will solve first for the country, so how they should bid conditional on the redistribution policy, and then we'll understand what will be the decision of the committee. So in these plots, I present the strategies. So what we have here we have this constraint which I have described. So this is the endowment constraints here for country A and here for country B. And then we have equal profitability constraints. So it's alpha 2b, and this also alpha 2b. So it is the decision of the committee. Now, I would argue that in both of these graphs, we have the equilibrium marked by the blue dot. So consider the first case. In the first case, we have the redistribution policy such that the country receive a share which is larger than the minimum endowment of these two countries. So here we assume that country B is poorer than country A, and in this case, in the first picture, the committee proposed redistribution policy such that it would return to country more than the endowment of the poor country. So in this case, the equilibrium will be indeed in this point, which is pretty simple to prove. So assume I'm a country A, and I do not want to bid more than the endowment of country B, because in this case I can decrease my bid and increase my profit because I pay less, but still wins the right to host the event. Again, if I have a bid lower than this point, then I can lose to country B. So I guess it's a kind of general type of proof in economics. So the equilibrium will be here. And if we have the second case, when the proposed redistribution policy returns lower than endowment of country B, the poor country, sorry, um, then it is not optimal for countries to bid higher than this share because again have negative profit, and as I said before, it is not beneficial for us to bid lower than this point because otherwise the other player could win and will lose the money. And this we have these two types of equilibrium. So it's an optimal bidding for countries. Yeah, so it's a formal theorem. So again, if we have the case when the redistribution policy is greater than endowment of the poor country, then the equilibrium is that both countries propose a bid equal to the endowment of the poor country. Again, if the redistribution is lower than endowments, then we propose a bid which equals to the profit we would receive in case of the win. It is the optimal decisions of the countries. Next, let us turn to the committee. As I said, the committee payoff is determined by the following. So it redistributes to the countries share alpha, and 1 minus alpha is the share of the committee. And it is trivial that if we maximize the linear function, the committee would be interested to propose alpha equals to 0 to receive all the money. And we end up in the equilibrium where the country A wins by a tiebreaker because it has larger endowments and the bids are equal, and the committee receive all the profits. So it's the result for the two period, and I think I hope it should be clear. And now we proceed to the more interesting case where we have 3 periods. This is a sketch of the proof which I have talked through. So yes, in the t equals to 3, we have 2 types of the committee. And it is the key idea of this paper. So first, again, we have a profit maximization committee, as we saw in the previous solution. So in t equals to 2, we shouldn't consider rotation because there is no opportunity technically for rotation. But for t equals to 3, we have 2 bidding stages. Therefore, we can think about rotation here. And that's why the second type of the committee which we consider is the committee which tries to ensure rotation. So first, it should ensure rotation, but still, it could maximize its profit conditional on achieving the rotation. And if we consider the profit maximization case, then the solution would be similar to the one proposed above. So we have these 2 countries, and again, since the committee tries to maximize its profit, it would assign the redistribution policy equal to 0. So in both periods, the committee would take all the profits. And that's why, again, by the tiebreaker rule, the country A would win in each period, because it doesn't lose money in the first period to win the hosting rights, and that's why it remains the richer country, and it can win again in the second period. So we see that if we have the profit maximizing committee, which profit maximizing committee, the rotation doesn't hold because again we have this domination of the richer country. However, if we turn to the case of the rotation, so the main question of this paper, there are two ways how the committee could ensure rotation. So here is the simplistic representation of the game. It's similar to the diagram I showed before. So again, we have the committee, bidding stage, and there are two outcomes. Either country A wins or country B wins. Then in the second period, again, we have a committee, bidding stage, and one of the two out results. And what is the rotation? Rotation is that we have the sequence of winners which are different. So first we have the country A and the country B, or we have country B and the country A. And here we consider the following. So the case where the country A wins first and then the country B is the smoothing pass. The smoothing pass, we call it in this way because the committee would try to redistribute in a way to make the country A poorer in the next period. And that's why it allows the country B to win. I will show more details later. So the red is the smoothing path. So the committee tries to smooth the inequality between countries, and that is the way to ensure rotation. The second possibility is incentivizing. So we can make the following. So as we saw before, the countries receive zero profits. So they bids equal to their distribution policy or to their endowments. Therefore, their profit from hosting the event is zero. And that's why the committee could do the following. It could incentivize the country A to lose in the first period, so we see that the country B wins. And then it could win in the second period um, with a positive profit. So the committee say, okay, I please lose to the country B now, and I will redistribute to you a positive profit in the second period. And in the end, we compare these two paths and see that committee is better off to go by this path. So it turned out that indeed the committee would like to smooth rather than incentivize because it is costly for the committee. Yeah, and here is the solution. So in the three-period game, if the committee tries to ensure rotation, the countries in the first period bids similar to the case where we have two-period games. Two-period game, countries have a bid which equals to the redistribution policy. And same thing for the second bidding stage. But the committee now should redistribute something to country A or B just to smooth the inequality. And as we see, the country, the committee in the first period proposed the share which exactly equal to the difference between the endowments of the country. And by doing this, the committee proposed such a bid, and the country A pays this bid. And that's why in the second period, the endowment of the country A is lower, and it is lower than the endowment of the country B. And that's why when in the second period, the committee proposes the redistribution policy equals to zero, the country B propose a bid the same as we saw before, but now it wins because it has the higher endowment than country A, again by the tiebreaker rule. And now to say that, okay, we have these two paths, what is the equilibrium? We should compare the payoffs of the committee. So if we have a profit maximization committee, the profit will be 2B. So in both period, we take, oh, I'm sorry, it was another passage. So to show that the smoothing path is in equilibrium, we should compare the profits from smoothing path and incentivizing path. And it turned out that by the assumption that the country A is richer than the country B, the smoothing path is profitable for the committee. And that's why we obtain this equilibrium. And now, one of the questions of this paper, what is the cost of the rotation? And here we return to the comparison between profit maximization committee and the committee which tries to ensure rotation. So under the profit maximization, we saw that the profit was 2 Bs. So in both periods, the committee gets all the profits. But if it tries to ensure rotation, then it pays for this rotation by the difference of the endowments of the countries. So here is this costs. And as we saw, the cost of the rotation is exactly the difference between endowments. So, and this stage of this paper is kind of main result. So we proved that rotation is possible as the result of competition, but it is costly for the committee. And if we think about the countries, for them there is because if we since their strategies for bidding are the same, so their bids are equal to the redistribution policy. In the end of the game, when all the mega event take place and they receive their profits, the net profit is zero. So they will end up with the same endowment. Yeah, and turning to the conclusions, we're concluding the following. So first, rotation is possible, at least in our settings. Second, rotation is achievable by redistribution. So if the committee maximizes profit, we wouldn't see any rotation because there is a natural inequality between countries, and the poor country do not have resources to outbid the richer country. And the redistribution is one of the tools we try to help the committee to ensure rotation. And it follows that the economic inequality is one of the factors which prevents rotation in our model, and I think that it is a reasonable result if we think about real world. Because as I said before in the motivation part, previously FIFA Cup took place in the richer countries. And it is reasonable because mega events are kind of expensive to take place in the poor countries. And as I should mention, it is a working paper, so we're still working on this project, and we propose several next steps. So the first, we will try to make robustness checks for our tiebreakers, because now they could seem pretty strong, but as I try to check, if we have an opposite tiebreaker, if the winner is the poorer country, these results are still the same. And also, we will try to think whether our assumptions are reasonable and whether our results are very vulnerable to change of the assumptions. Second, we will try to introduce the exogenous shocks of countries' welfare, and it should reflect the crisis in our world. So, for example, if there is a country which can host the mega event, but there is a crisis, and probably this exogenous variation would be one of the factor which could ensure rotation naturally in the competition. And the third point is to indigenize the profit. So now we consider the profit as a fixed amount, and it might be arguable because, for example, if I invest more in the mega event, why I should receive the same profit as the country which invests less? So probably it would also somehow affect our results, and we would see whether there is some interesting mechanism to discuss. So in this stage, I would like to hear any of your comments about the paper or any suggestions to further development.
Great. Thank you very much, Anastasia, for your talk. I will encourage everyone to go to their team's reactions and give a round of applause like I'm doing. So thank you, Anastasia. That was very interesting talk indeed. Dimitri is here to answer all difficult questions that any people in the audience might give you, which is good to see. Good to see you, Dimitri. So I will open up the floor to anyone who has any questions that they would like to ask. Dennis, in there.
It's probably because I came in late. I didn't catch the intuition of the two-stage bid. Is it that you're thinking about, for example, a bid for the, say, 2022 event, and then following with a bid for the 2026 event? Or is there a preliminary stage where some bids are removed and then those that remain have provide a second bid?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's the first case. So, for example, in this two stage, the first stage bid for 1 year and the second for another year, and that's why it is important that countries pays now and kind of bear the cost of the game, and only then they will receive a profit. So, so the second bidding is when the country which won in the previous period doesn't receive any profits. So it's the first case you have described.
Okay. I'll ask a second question then. I was a little confused. Is alpha times V the payoff to the country or the profit? Because it seems as though you said it both ways, and I wasn't sure what you had in mind, but it does seem like the profit is alpha times V minus the bid.
Yeah, sure. So the profit is the the price from the hosting mega event, which is alpha times V, and minus the bid. Yeah, I think it is a payoff from hosting the mega event.
And in equilibrium, at least one of the equilibriums, that was zero.
Yeah, for countries, it will be zero because I guess in all cases which I have described, the bid equals to the redistribution policy, which proposes by the committee.
Okay, so the bottom line is the committee figures out how to maximize its return, and the countries that do the bidding get nothing on that.
Yeah, so yeah, so I would say this. So first, it will be counterintuitive for me because it's strange that we can have a mega event at zero costs, but one could think about the following. So assume there is a minimum bid for hosting the event. So for example, you should um, have a stadium or something like this. So like fixed investments. And we can just normalize it to zero and think about it, okay, that each country should fulfill this obligatory part and only then bid something more than that. So I think that it would be nicer to think in this way rather than pure zero. But yes. So, and if we look at the empirical research about the net economic benefits from hosting the mega events, they are even zero or negative sometimes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Anastasia. Any more questions and comments? Stefan.
Thanks, Anastasia. Yeah, very interesting, and I think it's a very good subject to work on because it's obviously a really important issue. So I guess I had a couple of questions. So one is why you frame it into, I mean, really apropos of your last comment, why frame this in terms of making a profit, whereas what I think, as you say, from the empirical research, what we really think happens is that countries are bidding to host the most lavish event that they possibly can afford. And so it's rather than being a problem, it might make more, I don't think it would necessarily change anything, just to reframe it and say, what's going on here is that people are paying what FIFA cares about is the host country spending the maximum amount of money possible, and then you get this conflict of objectives because then they want to have rotation as well, and so you've got some trade-off between getting the biggest bid and having some rotation. The other question I wanted to suppose is, as you rightly point out, traditionally these events have been largely well, they were in Europe and South America, and so I think there's two things to say about that. So firstly, these were the countries where football first became the dominant sport, and had large professional leagues and huge amounts of fan interest. So in some sense, you could argue that the original distribution of these tournaments had a lot to do with not to do with just the demand factors. There was just more interest in hosting these things. And what we've seen in more recent years is this conscious policy of trying to redistribute and try to rotate rather than keep it always in Europe and South America. And so I wonder if you can think of, and that is probably a challenge for future modeling, but thinking in terms of, well, can you model that change in behavior? So how FIFA transitions from being an institution that's quite happy to see it always in Europe and South America to then becoming an institution which actually wants to share it more equally around the world.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting thought. And I think that during work on this paper, we assume that people would like to have the rotation. So your question is more fundamental, why they would like to have the rotation. And just interesting. Thank you. I would try to think whether we can introduce something, at least, to this model.
Well, may I add a couple of thoughts, Anastasia? Don't you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Stefan, thank you so much for your suggestions. Well, at the beginning of this project, we thought about different mechanisms, how the choice of the host country is made. And we started from some social choice theories. And unfortunately, we didn't get any interesting ideas behind that. So we tried to model, for example, the political influence inside the committees. But it was very difficult to model the rotation, assuming that we have such an institute that chooses the countries. So the idea behind the rotation is indeed somewhere outside this model, yes? So we just postulate the idea that the committee is interested in promoting the football across the world. But if you have any ideas why the committee can be interested, and we would really appreciate this idea.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, right. So we know why FIFA changed its policies in practical terms, because FIFA was run by a colonialist, racist British guy up until 1974, and who was then kicked out and replaced by a corrupt Brazilian who promised to give payoffs to everybody else. So we know factually what happened here. I mean, it's interesting to see whether, but obviously that's it's not clear how you would model that in economic terms. But what your comment then made in terms of thinking about the model made me think, actually, maybe one framework to think about this, one modeling framework would be competition amongst states to attract corporations to locate in their countries or states. So, for example, there must be a literature out there on how states compete with tax breaks to bring factories to their country, to their region, right? And presumably you have the same equilibrium where effectively the tax rate is driven down to zero in order to attract countries. So maybe there's something in that literature you could look at as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. Alex has his hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, it's very nice to see you guys. I'll show myself as well. So I have a question. First of all, it's more a comment. We really need more papers on more theoretical papers in sports economics. So comment that's very important because we mostly moved into empirics and we still need good theory. That's one. Second, you have 2 players in your model, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe before 74 or a little bit before 88, 80, there were only Europe and maybe North America that wanted to host those events. But now we have, I think it was also in Africa, the World Cup, and we have in Asia. So can you extend your model to more than 2 players?
So first, when we tried to model the interaction between these players, we thought about increasing the number of players because, as you said again, it's just reasonable that now we have more than 2 players. But just for simplicity, we solved the model for 2 players, and we just only considered to extend it for 3 or 4 players.
Because I'm not sure that the result would really be the same, because I know from theory, once you change something in the theoretical model, the whole thing may change.
Yeah, sometimes it's true. And probably it would be the case here, and we'll proceed with this later on.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, thank you first of all, but honestly, I do not expect any substantial changes just because if you recall the nature of the first prize auction, for example, the number of players does not affect the type of the equilibrium there. So there are no major differences between the auction between 2 players and 3 players. We will check it carefully, but honestly, at this point, I do not expect major changes.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Anastasia and Dimitri. We've got Dennis with his hand up.
Thanks. In listening to Stefan and Alex and your responses, I'm a little bit confused. And the confusion is you focused in this response in the questions to bidding to host FIFA events. I thought in the title that I saw it was mega events, and bidding to host the Olympics has happened for a longer period of time than bidding to host FIFA events. And I wonder if there's something different about those bidding processes that would be useful to consider here. The second thing that occurred to me is that, and I don't know how you would introduce this, but my sense is that part of the change wasn't because the international organization suddenly decided, oh, we really want to share this wealth around to the rest of the world. It was more the Western Europe and North America said, we're tired of all this nonsense about what a great deal this is and it being a big waste of our money. And then we spend billions and billions of dollars or euros or whatever, and we get nothing out of it. And so now the only people who are really willing to bid are people that you might say are having it redistributed to them to get it into Africa and Asia and so on. And there's plenty of evidence that the cost in part a reaction to the Sochi costs was that many countries said we can't possibly spend that kind of money, and so they backed out. That's not something on the part of the Olympic Committee or FIFA that said we want to redistribute. That was bidders becoming sane all of a sudden. And I don't know how you build that in, but I think that would be a useful thing to try to consider.
Yeah, thanks for your question. As for your first comment about the difference between Olympics and FIFA, I would say that we were inspired by the FIFA case, as I described in the motivation part, and I think that our results match the decision making in this organization. But since we consider the general model of decision making, I do not see any problems in applying it in another organization like Olympic Games, because I think that they have similar goals, similar procedures in terms of hosting the event. So I would say that in terms of decision making, we can use it in both organizations. And yeah, at least in my point of view. And as for your second comment, it is, yeah, it's true. And I even saw some literature about this. And it is an interesting and important idea that costs of games are rising, especially after Russia and China. And yeah, democratic countries do not like to host the event because of the costs, and the voters do not support this idea. And I'm not sure how to introduce the model, but probably we can think about it at some point.
Great. Oh, go on, Dimitri.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I might add a couple of words. So first of all, the rules of choosing the host of the FIFA World Cup and the host of the Olympic Games are very similar. So there are several rounds, and in each round you lose one of the participants, and this continues after you get a country that gets more than half of the votes. So the rules are pretty similar. However, I believe that the mechanism behind this decision is not the main idea here. So the main idea here is that it's the economic inequality that has influence on the sequence of the host countries. And about the second question, Dennis, at the start of this project, we tried to introduce different regimes, some democratic and autocratic regimes, and they have different utility functions. Profit maximization in one case, probability of staying in power in the other case, but we failed to solve the model. It was too complex. Probably we can still think in that direction, and I think there are some chances that we will get some political economy explanation behind the rotation. But at this moment we don't have this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Just one other thing that occurred to me as you were speaking, Dmitry. You know, there's this paper by Rosenspiegel that says that it's not so much hosting as bidding that's important. And I wonder if there's a way to build that into your story so that after you get past the first round, you're not so interested in actually winning. But that's a different, that's not sequence of Olympics. It's the sequence leading up to a particular World Cup, say. But anyways, just thinking about how Rosenspiegel's kind of story would fit into your model, I think would be really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that paper. Thank you, Dennis. We will try to think in this direction. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dennis. Stefan, did you put your hand back up? Or is it still the same hand from earlier on?
No, sorry, still the same hand. Sorry, I shall put it down.
Back it up. Not a problem. Fantastic. Any final questions and comments for Anastasia and Dimitri? Okay, well, in which case, thank you once again, Anastasia, for a great presentation and a really interesting paper. And we look forward to seeing how the paper develops. And as mentioned at the start, we're now into the autumn schedule for the Reading Online Sports Economics Seminars, and we return next week. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks very much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.